Good afternoon, everybody. It gives me great pleasure, immense pleasure to welcome you back to yet another Sunday webinar edition of on the topic, the success of failure and the failure of success. Paradoxical as it may sound, so many of us have had experiences which in the moment felt as if it was the very epitome of success. But as you look back over your life in retrospect, you might evaluate it differently and actually find that what you considered to be a success in that moment that you were joyous and jubilant about actually took away something significant, was actually in a longer time frame can be reframed as a failure. Similarly, there are experiences that we've had which in the moment we experienced as a failure, but later on as events unfolded and life unfolded, we have begun to acknowledge the immense contribution that those experiences made. So thank you all. I see a few new faces and some familiar faces of people reconnecting. And I'm grateful to you all for being here and for joining us today. So in exploring today's topic, I would like to start with talking about different conceptions of success very briefly, and some of us might be familiar with one of my favorite metaphors, the success of the lion in the circus versus the success of the lion in the jungle. What do we mean by this? Many of us have seen a lion in the, I can imagine a lion in the jungle. Many of us may not have seen a lion in the jungle. I've seen a lion in the jungle as I'm from India, but it's not a common experience that you have every day. So you see a lion in the jungle roaring, majestic, and full of his own power. In that way, he's alive to the kingdom, not just the kingdom outside, but the vast kingdom of his own being, of his own power. Let us imagine this circus lion gets captured. It's now trained in a circus setting to perform certain tricks. And the circus lion is much adored because he brings in a lot of revenue. He brings in so much money and he brings enjoyment to the kids who are watching him, to the parents. Everybody is applauding. Now, the circus lion could become intoxicated with his own success. He doesn't even have to run after the deer and prey. He has a full 5-course meal served to him. Now, the circus lion might be thinking, I am so successful. But at the same time, many of us recognize that a part of that lion in the jungle has had to die in order to be resurrected as the successful circus lion. And how many of us can relate to the tragedy of this happening in our own lives? When we are born, says Osho, the Indian mystic, we are born like lions in the jungle, presiding over vast oceans of our own consciousness, empires of our own potential. And then we are kidnapped by a school and taught certain defined ways of performing division and indoctrinated into the ways of the world and society. And by the time you have your education and you're working in an organization with its job description, its competencies and skills, we have now been resurrected as a lion in the circus with a clearly defined job description, but one that actually, in a way, does not honor the fullness of our potential. And often when I teach classes and I find senior leaders taking classes, I ask them, what percentage of your potential as a human being for creativity, for innovation, for stimulation, intellectual stimulation, emotional authenticity, whatever may be the dimensions, what percentage of that potential do you feel you're using on an everyday basis? And most people say not more than 20%. So the reality is that we have created an idea of success that is very much rooted and anchored in our professional identities. And part of the challenge is to reverse this process of colonization of the consciousness in terms of seeing and measuring our success through our jobs and through a measurable criterion in terms of how things look outwardly. Another two contrasting models of success that I want to quickly touch upon is something that I have referred to in previous webinars here. It's the blue ocean success versus the red ocean success. Now, that's based on a management bestseller that was written, which contrasted two kinds of success. The red ocean success is where you're in a highly competitive environment. cutthroat competition like the fast food industry, and you're defining success in terms of how much of the market share that you are able to capture, to what extent have you been able to decimate the competition. A completely different conception of success comes from the book called Blue Ocean Strategy, which highlights the success of a company like Cirque du Soleil. Now, Cirque du Soleil decided they didn't want to compete in the red ocean waters of circus companies and try to fight other circus companies. They decided they did not want to fight other theater companies, by being in red ocean. Red ocean, why do they call it red ocean? Because in a red ocean, people are stabbing each other and people are bleeding into the water, causing the waters to turn red, and therefore a highly contested and competitive space. Cirque du Soleil decided they will create a whole new domain where they will play, and they call that circus theater. That's neither circus nor theater. And that's the concept of a blue ocean strategy, where one of the people who's swimming in the red ocean waters, being attacked, being bleeding, decides to swim far away from the competitive strife and to swim in a part of the ocean where the waters are pristine and blue, and experiences blue ocean. Now that translates to our individual level as it's the contrast between trying to be successful in terms of competing versus trying to achieving a different kind of success, which is not necessarily achieved in competition, but by the immense power, of being ourselves fully. So those are two contrasting models. I want to briefly touch upon how confusing it is when we really look deeply into what is success. The work on philosophical orientations talks about how different individuals measure the worth and the success of any activity in terms of completely different kinds of criteria. People with a very pragmatic orientation, for you, success comes from achieving measurable results. And I know some of us are wired that way. People with an intellectual orientation, they're not as concerned with measurable results. They're concerned with deepening their understanding and insight into different perspectives, into different situations. If they feel that they have expanded and grown intellectually, they feel they're successful, either by developing their knowledge or their wisdom. Then people with a human value orientation primarily evaluate the worth of an activity and measure their success in terms of their relationships. If they have strong, robust, intimate relationships, that's their perception of success. And people with a spiritual orientation might have a completely different conception of success, not so much in terms of the results that they produce in this world, but with a very otherworldly perspective of growing, in their own spiritual and other consciousness. So having shared that with you, I want to refer to two stories. One of them, or parables as you might call them. One of them, of course, I will not repeat because I talk about them often. It is the irony of the rat race of the Mexican fisherman and the American tourist that represents two different models of success. In the eyes of the Mexican fisherman, and I know that this might involve some stereotyping, being yourself with, in the presence of the trees, in the presence of nature, in the presence of your family, just being defines success. And in the eyes of the American businessman, it is a process of becoming. I need to first, it's not enough for me to be selling this fish on the beach. I need to set up a process. I need to invest in a mechanized trawler. Then I will increase my fish catching productivity. And if I do that, perhaps I can set up a processing plant where I will be able to sell the fish that I catch. And if I'm able to do that, I probably will be able to then, move to a different city, a bigger city from where I can direct a huge global enterprise. And if I do that, I would probably then move to New York City and make millions of dollars just investing in the stock market. And then, of course, the Mexican fisherman is thinking, well, what would you do after that, Mr. American businessman? And then the paradox, the irony of the story is then the American businessman says, well, then I'd then move into a tiny Mexican village. I'd sleep until about 5 in the evening. I'd sleep until about 10 in the morning. I'd get up. I'd have a lunch. I'd catch some fish. I would come and sell the fish in the beach. I would go take a siesta with my wife, play with the children, play hide and seek, enjoy my life. There is this huge clash of cultures that's happening globally. So let's be aware that the Mexican fisherman and the American tourists don't just represent individuals, they represent huge paradigms of what is considered success. And then the being oriented cultures have a very different conception of success as the joy of being. And the becoming oriented cultures or the doing oriented cultures measure their success in terms of productivity, in terms of how much they've achieved. I want to briefly touch upon the stonecutter parable, and some of you may have heard that, but it does bring a very important distinction between Eastern and Western models of success. And that's something that I'd like to spend a little time going through. But the stonecutter parable is something where it is said that there is a stonecutter who is chiseling away at his rocks and hewing at his stones. And he's tired and he's exhausted. And he sees an emperor who is riding in a beautiful chariot, and there's somebody holding a golden umbrella over him. So obviously the stonecutter feels very envious, and he prays to the powers that be. I wish I'm no longer a stonecutter. I wish I could be that emperor. I see himself relaxing on a silk couch, and there's somebody holding an umbrella over him. Let me become that person. So the universe grants him his favor, his request, desire, and makes him the emperor. And soon the sun starts beating down on this emperor's face, and he starts sweating and he's burning from heat. So he says the sun has excelled the emperor in power, and he prays that he become the sun so that then he can be more powerful, climb one more notch on the ladder of power. So the universe grants him that favor, that desire, and he becomes the sun, and he starts beating down on the emperor. Pretty soon a cloud comes between the sun and the emperor. Now the sun is frustrated because the rays of the sun, powerful as they might have seemed, are not able to penetrate the cloud. So the stonecutter, in utter frustration, says, forget this, I want to be a cloud, because the cloud has excelled the sun in power, and I'm on this huge power trip. And so the universe makes him the cloud. Now the cloud begins to start raining, and when the cloud rains, he feels the immense power, because he's washing away houses, he's washing away, there's a huge flood and a torrential downpour. And he says, I'm feeling so powerful, I'm able to destroy so much. But then there is a rock that is standing, and no matter how much he's beating down upon the rock through rainfall, the rock doesn't budge an inch. So the stonecutter says, make me the rock, because the rock has even excelled the cloud in power and has excelled the rain in power. So the universe grants him that desire and makes him the rock. And just as he becomes the rock, another stonecutter comes along and starts chiseling away at this rock with a hammer and a sickle and all the tools that he needs. And then the stonecutter says, wow, the stonecutter is more powerful than the rock. Please make me a stonecutter. And so he has come full circle. It's like the grass is greener on the other side. He kept desiring and desiring more power, but then he comes back to being the stonecutter. And this parable is used in the East to wake us up to this metaphor of the giant, like the Ferris wheel that you have, in fairs, which is turning and turning, that the whole life is one spinning wheel. And this wheel is being energized. It's spinning at like 90 or 100 miles an hour by human desire, that all of us have so many unfulfilled desires. Think of the number of unfulfilled desires you have right at this moment. And imagine if all of those were being converted into some form of energy that could cause the wheel to spin, uncontrollably. Can you imagine how powerful that would be? So that's the wheel called the samsara. And the challenge is that it is driven by continuous desires. Now, desires are often born out of the past, and they're projected into the future. One of the things that you will notice is that the world at any point seems to be dominated often by people with very powerful desires. Now, we have to go a little into the anatomy of desiring, because that is so intrinsically tied up to the idea of success. And I'm not here to assert that the desires that I'm going to, how I dissect it and present it is the right way. As I said, this is an Eastern perspective on success and failure, right? So each desire, Okay, so one, we have to understand the difference between the desires and needs. Needs come out of the body and they can be fulfilled. Desires come out of the mind, out of what we have caricatured as the chattering monkey. And in so many ways, as Osho says, desires are constantly growing in the mind as leaves are growing on a tree. And it doesn't matter how many of them you cut, they will grow more and more and more. Now, the desire places us in a very interesting conundrum. The mind is such, and the ego is such, that anything that we desire, the moment we have achieved it, it has almost lost all of its value. Think about it, the extent to which this is true for us in our own lives. We desire things so passionately with all the capacity for desire at our command. And then the moment it is achieved, for a few days, perhaps there's a high, and then the desiring starts again. And this is something that mystics like Osho, and I want to reference this book, which I found extremely powerful and helpful in looking at my own desire for fame, fortune, and ambition. The book is called Fame, Fortune, and Ambition. What is the real meaning of success by Osho? OSHO is the author, and he goes into many interesting models of success and what is the real meaning of success and drawing upon those. So, so, so this particular conundrum that we desire things, but the moment we achieve them, they have lost their value. So the human ego is interested in only that which we don't have, that which we have not attained to. And yet fulfillment and bliss can only come from what we have. So can you see the disconnect there? The desiring of and valuing of what you don't have, but at the same time, true fulfillment can only come from what you have. No wonder, says Osho, human beings seem to be caught up in an eternal sense of scarcity, that no matter how much money you make, you feel that you are poor. No matter how many labor-saving devices you have, you feel you're busier than ever. And it goes on and on and on. Now, one of the genesis of success, and there are many different ways in which one can dissect success. I spent some time looking at the work of 50 different philosophers, looking at what has success meant to them. And I developed enough material for a full day seminar, but that's not the objective today. I'll try to share with you a few things that I took away that might be of some use to us in terms of being able to be more joyous in our lives. So one of the ways, says Osho, is man has introduced misery and suffering in the world, our conditioning to be ambitious. So, we think ambition is a harmless thing. What is the harm? I'll desire something and I'll go after it. Yes, that is probably true. But we forget the way in which ambition introduces a very strong element of comparison, and how that comparative consciousness starts creating a tremendous amount of misery in the world. And when you look at nature, you don't see that comparative consciousness. Look at trees, blissful as they are, in any season. The trees are not competing. That the taller tree is not saying, I want to be an even greater tree than you are. I want to be a widely celebrated and famous tree, and I don't want you to be famous. There are no great trees. Now, but man has started evaluating everything in terms of an external criterion of success. And as he has started chasing these external criteria of success, he has moved farther and farther away from two things that are so important. One, his own being, the center of his own being, and even more important, the intrinsic enjoyment of what you find so immersive, enjoyable. It is the idea that there is a difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation consists of things that we find so enjoyable, even if there was no reward associated with it. And intrinsic motivation brings a tremendous kind of contentment. We all know of poets who are writing poetry and they're lost in it and they're completely immersed in it. It's the kind of experience that leads to what Csikszentmihalyi calls, and I know I'm mispronouncing the name of the author, calls flow experiences, where the boundary between work and play collapses. You appear to be working, but the sense of engagement is so deep that it almost appears like play. So we have moved away from intrinsic enjoyment and reconditioned ourselves in terms of extrinsic enjoyments, extrinsic desires and goals, which leads to the unfortunate reality that many of us are in jobs that have nothing to do with what brings us an intrinsic sense of enjoyment. And if we have moved and drifted away, far away from our own nature, from what our soul craves for in terms of enjoyment, whether that's playing the flute or whether that is gardening or whatever it is, or poetry, or building a business empire, whatever it is that is intrinsically motivating to you, with no judgment and with no implied hierarchy, when we are not indulging in what is soul food for our soul, the nourishment of intrinsic motivation, we are then wandering in the desert of dissatisfaction, chasing a mirage after mirage of things that seem to satisfy us but never really do. And one of the challenges is that and I want to talk about this as the existential conundrum of the unique, special, and extraordinary. I have shared one half of the conundrum with you in previous webinars, and that is this, that many of us are trying as hard as we can to be seen as unique, special, and extraordinary. Like I'm doing these Sunday webinars. I want to be remembered as, oh, Param is a business professor, but does these Sunday webinars on these highfalutin philosophical and spiritual topics. We work so hard to be unique, special, and extraordinary. But the cosmic joke is that we don't have to work hard to be unique, special, and extraordinary. As Osho has reminded us, each one of us has already been created unique, special, and extraordinary. I can look in Ohio and I will not find one person exactly like me. I can look all over the 50 states of the United States. There's not one person who's exactly like me. And I can look in every country of the world. You will not find one other human being exactly like me. In other words, in the entire planet, there is no other human being like Param. And I'm already unique, special, and extraordinary. If we can let this deeply sink in and be absorbed by the soil of our consciousness, so much of our effort that is directed towards extrinsic reward, recognition, applause, in ways in which we are starving ourselves intrinsically in the quest for this extrinsic recognition, we'll see the absurdity of it. I don't have to bust my ass, excuse the language, to be unique, special, and extraordinary, because who I am is unique, special, and extraordinary. Now, that could lead to a very egocentric consciousness. So I want to divide the spiritual journey towards coming to that place of deep equanimity around success in two phases. The normal condition we are into is we have a deep inferiority complex arising out of things often that have been said to us in childhood or in schools, and we fear that we suck in so many different ways. And then we try so hard to prove that we don't suck. There is nothing wrong with me. I am special, I'm unique, but we don't really believe it. When we don't really believe that we have been created unique, special, and extraordinary, we fall into the comparative consciousness of comparing ourselves. And we try to run harder and harder and faster, as if the comparison will ever lead us to a level of contentment. No, because as Osho says, the moment you climb one ladder, you think you've reached the pinnacle of your ambitions, and 100 other ladders have opened up, and then you're busy climbing those 100 ladders. So we are lost. The first space of spiritual awakening that Osho describes is to awaken to the idea that I am unique, special, and extraordinary, so that we can start transcending this thirst and hunger for endless recognition, appreciation, acknowledgement, praise, and applause from the outside world. So we transcend that. But if we stop there, it is not enough. It is when we open our eyes and notice that everybody else is also unique, special, and extraordinary. There is no human being like any of the people, the Instacart person who's going to be filling my grocery cart today, there is no human being like them on this entire planet. They too are unique, special, and extraordinary, while I may not even stop to notice them or look them in the eye. Now, when we come to that, there is a paradoxical realization, which to Osho is perhaps the only real success: to be at peace with being ordinary. Wow, that's a completely different turn. First, we started reminding you that you're already extraordinary, unique, and special. You don't have to be putting in all this effort to becoming something that you already are. If you open your eyes and awaken, you'll see how special you are. But then don't stop there. Notice that everybody is just as special as you are. Every flower, every blade of grass is special. Every moment is unique, special, and extraordinary. It'll never happen again. But from there, you make this paradoxical leap where you come to a deep state of being at peace with being ordinary. Because when you are at peace, and it's a great paradox, is Osho, the most extraordinary thing in the world is to find contentment in being ordinary. Because each one of us in one way or the other is trying to be extraordinary. So if we can be at peace being ordinary, it is a very deep place. Now, one might say, well, if I'm content with being ordinary, who will invent a cure for cancer? And of course, the Eastern mystics like Osho will come back to you and say, don't ever mistake flowering with what we call ambition. Ambition is in the world of comparison. Flowering is like releasing your fragrance. Like a flower is releasing its fragrance, you are what Maslow would call on the path of self-actualization. You're flowering to the fullness of who you were meant to be, to the fullness of your potential, which is very different than ambition. Now, there are parables about ambition in Eastern culture. There's in the court of a very wise emperor Akbar, somebody drew a line and said, I want you to make this line look small without touching it. How can you make this line that I've drawn on the wall look small without touching it? Birbal, who was the wisest of them all, picked up another marker and he drew a much longer line next to it. And he said, look, the moment I draw the much longer line next to it, this line looks small. So this is one of the major differences in models of success. Some people have pursued the idea of doing great things and producing grand outcomes. To be worthy of such eminence that, there is the mythical mountain called Sumera, where you will write your name on the mountain where only great men and women have their names written. And there are parables that say that so many people after they die go to Sumera to write their name on that mountain so that they will be immortalized. And then they discover that there is really no room to write their name because millions of great people have already written their name. And the only way you can write your name is by erasing somebody else's. You begin to see that in the vastness of the human ocean, we are ultimately a drop. And true success comes in being accepting of that. And many of the mindfulness and meditative exercises connect us with that non-comparative consciousness. For example, one of the meditation exercises has you cover your eyes and get in touch with that vast sky of inner consciousness that is there within you. And just as there's a sky outside, notice that there's a sky inside. You can feel your own consciousness. And then you can speak to that consciousness. When you close your eyes, you can ask yourself, from the space of the consciousness, am I a success or am I a failure? But when you are faced with your own inner consciousness, are you a success or a failure? I mean, your inner consciousness is the sky. Can you ask the sky, hey, sky, are you a success or a failure? The sky is beyond those comparisons. If I have to decide if I'm a success or a failure, I have to open my eyes, start looking around and comparing myself with others. Because success and failure only are rooted in comparative consciousness. They involve a comparison. They're not properties in of themselves. Am I rich or poor? Even that is rooted in comparison. Because one beggar may be rich compared to another beggar, and a billionaire may be poor compared to a millionaire. We begin to realize that none of these things really matter. In the space of non-comparative consciousness, real success is about being ourselves fully. Now, I know it's 2:30, so I want to end with a fitting poem written called Playthings, written by Rabindranath Tagore. And I mentioned Rabindranath Tagore because I hope my memory is not playing tricks with me at the age of 58. But Rabindranath Tagore was somebody, I think, who was either offered to be knighted or given the Nobel Prize in Literature. I think it was Nobel Prize in Literature. And the gentleman gracefully refused it. And he said, no, 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 I don't need it. And he was not somebody who was trying to, that paradoxical humility, arrogance that you can say, I'm such a great person, I even refused the Nobel Prize and it doesn't matter to me. He was not coming from there. If you knew Rabindranath Tagore, he had truly attained to that state of consciousness where the external accolades were not necessarily something that mattered to him. So he wrote a thing called Playthings, where he looks at a child that is playing in the mud. And here are his thoughts. So I think it's a fitting way to honor the soul of Rabindranath Tagore with this poem. Okay, here goes. Playthings. Child, how happy you are sitting in the dust, playing with a broken twig all the morning. I smile at your play with that little bit of a broken twig. I'm busy with my accounts, adding up figures by the hour. Perhaps you glance at me and you think, what a stupid game to spoil your morning with. Child, I have forgotten the art of being absorbed in sticks and mud pies. I seek out costly playthings and other lumps of gold and silver. With whatever you find, you create your glad games. I spend both my time and my strength over things I can never obtain. In my frail canoe, I struggle to cross the sea of desire and forget that I too am playing a game. So, folks, I want to leave you with that poem and with two more points that I would like to conclude with in just a couple of minutes. One, you cannot enjoy success unless you can enjoy failure. It's a very paradoxical statement. Dwell on it. Because if we are so dependent on something outside to give us a sense of enjoyment in life, we are enslaved. And success and failure are like two sides of the same coin, are like peaks and valleys. You cannot say, I want peaks and I don't want valleys, because peaks and valleys go together. And therefore, if you have to enjoy yourself on a peak, you have to have the art of enjoying yourself on a valley, roasting some s'mores and dancing to your favorite music on the valley, and the valley has become a peak. And lastly, let us always remember Osho's point of the four orientations to life. The businessman measures his success in terms of how much can he sell the rose flower for and what profit he can make. The scientist measures his success in terms of how much can he understand the flower by dissecting it and analyzing it scientifically. The artist may measure his success in terms of how beautifully he can paint the flower, and he can write a poem about the flower and exaggerate its beauty. And the mystic will measure his success in terms of to what extent is he able to enjoy the mysteries of life and the mysteries of existence. So once again, folks, I found this to be an extremely rich book. If you want to add it to your bookshelf, Fame, Fortune, and Ambition, What is the Real Meaning of Success by Osho? I have probably covered 1% of the wisdom in this book, but that's all I was capable of assimilating and presenting to you today. And once again, a deep expression of my gratitude to all of you for being here. We have now concluded the formal part of the webinar and the presentation. So those of you who feel that you are ready to move on to fresh fields and pastures new, please go ahead and do that. I'm very grateful that you were here today and you made the time to join us. But I will hang around for a few more minutes, taking any questions that you might have, any points or observations that anybody has to make. Is going to be, we keep the mic open for a few minutes. You can unmute yourself at this point and speak and make any comments. And at some point when comments die down, we will end the meeting formally. So the formal part of it is anyway over at this point. So thank you so much, and may the force be with you. Very grateful for your presence. And until next week, when we have another webinar at 2 p.m. So please log off if you like to, but if you'd like to linger around for a few minutes of shooting the proverbial shit, I'm here to do that with you. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, does anybody have any comments? These presentations are weird. I spent so much time and there were so many things I wish I had said. It reminds me of, was it Mark Twain or somebody who said there are three presentations? One is the one that you actually deliver. Another is the